Amazing. Thank you so much, Jess, for hosting. I really appreciate all the hard work that you've put in on behalf of the PNW conference this week. And obviously, thank you to Bob, in case Bob listens back to this at any point. Really excited to be presenting to you all today. This is a new topic. Usually the conferences that I do, I'm able to recycle my speaking session because of different conference participation by area. But this is a new session that I'm going to be doing today, all about student fundraisers. There will be a nod to remote calling towards the back end of the presentation, but I think we're going to try and kind of keep this general. I think all of the topics that I've heard on the Phonathon front and all of the conferences I've attended this year have been very much focused on the remote situation that we find ourselves in. So whilst I'll nod to that, I'm not going to focus exclusively on remote calling as we go. Now, introductions before we get going, guys. Myself and the possible audio commentary as we go through from my cat Gimli, who is currently on my sofa just over here, but as we've all become used to with this work from home, there's a high probability that there will be some meowing as we go through the presentation here today, so excuse that in advance, but this will be the source of any meowing that we might hear as we go. My name is Rachel. I work with VanillaSoft. I've spoken to, I can see Gabriel as well, I've spoken to Gabriel and certainly Shelby in the past. I may have spoken to more of you in my efforts to secure higher education customers for VanillaSoft. But at the moment in my role, I'm really lucky to work with around 100 universities on their Phonathon efforts. I've also kind of been forged in the Phonathon space. I was a student fundraiser myself at one time at Queen Mary University here in the UK. I then worked for a company called Listen, who do outbound tele-fundraising for a number of large UK charities. Then took on my own Phonathon program at King's College here in London, where I was managing around 40 students, give or take. We were calling 9 months a year. So I've risen up through the Phonathon ranks. I was using VanillaSoft to manage the campaign at King's, and that was how eventually I found my way to VanillaSoft, where I now, as I say, have the great privilege of working with around 100 universities on their calling efforts. I am a real Phonathon enthusiast. I think there are different attitudes to Phonathon. Obviously, a lot of hard work goes into a successful calling program, but I've always been hugely passionate about Phonathon. I think it represents a fantastic opportunity to really engage alumni in a way that no other development activity can. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of my enthusiasm and excitement and passion for Phonathon with you all as we go. Jess has very kindly said that she will monitor the chat box for any questions. So if you want to, if you have a burning question, you want to jump in, if you have any commentary or thoughts based on anything that I'm kind of talking about here today, feel free to jump in, and any highlights will be kind of touched upon by Jess and I can respond to them. I'm also planning that there will be some 15 minutes at the end to go over any questions or thoughts, again, feedback, ideas that have been raised as we go through. So time permitting, and if I don't get carried away with what I'm planning to talk to you about today, we should have time at the end as well. So, excuse me. In terms of the various topics that we're going to discuss today, we're going to talk from the very beginning, student recruitment efforts, the initial training. We'll touch on software and how that can help sort of elevate your students to new heights of fundraising success. Topics of trust and professionalism, which I find really interesting. I think there's a tendency to almost baby our fundraisers or mollycoddle them, if you will. It's probably a very English word, but I'm really passionate about placing a certain level of trust and instilling a level of professionalism in the students. Coaching and development, so not only initial training, but the importance of ongoing training and development for the student fundraising team, which is of course more important than ever, I think, in this remote environment that we find ourselves in. Motivation and incentives, now that's something that is handled very, very differently by each and every institution. I think there's a different approach, UK and US, to that. And indeed that UK-US distinction is something that I'll be talking about throughout the demo in terms of differences of approach. Retention it is, of course, a really important issue for any and all phonathon managers. Once we've invested this level of training and coaching and what have you into the students, we want to make sure that they stick around for as long as we possibly can. And of course, the more experience a student has, probably the more success they'll generate on behalf of you and your team. So we definitely don't want to see any students going off to different jobs if we can avoid it. And team building, which again is particularly hard at the moment without the kind of buzz of the call centre, but we'll be talking about that in a general sense in terms of how we can do that in normal times, but also ways that we can try and achieve that sense of team rapport, even in a remote environment. So why is this topic so important? The session that I usually do at conferences is all about ROI and all of the different things that we can do to generate the most optimal ROI from our fundraising. And I go through all sorts of different pieces around stewardship and scripting, what have you, data, contact rates, technology that can help. But actually at the end of that presentation, I usually kind of come back to the fact that, in my opinion, your students and your fundraisers are actually carrying the lion's share of responsibility when it comes to generating a positive ROI. And by that, of course, I mean raising as much money as possible. They're on the very, very front line of our development activity. I would argue that they have the toughest job in the entire development team. And I think often we neglect to consider that in terms of the investment of training and development that we might put in them as fundraising professionals. In terms of conversion, as I say, for me, they have the lion's share of that responsibility in terms of general engagement of your alumni, ensuring the most positive possible experience, delivering a lasting impression. Again, all of that boils down, if nothing else, to your fundraisers as individuals. So I think it's a hugely important topic to consider, because whilst your donors and alumni may not remember the specifics of the call, they may not remember the specifics of the projects that you've described or the asks that you've made, they are quite likely to remember the conversation with your student. And so making sure that your students are set up to have the most positive and dynamic and interesting, memorable conversation possible is hugely important. And last of all, I have always seen the fundraising team not just as sort of part-time employees, but as ambassadors of the university or the college. You know, that we're really putting an awful lot of faith in them and trust in them to create that positive sort of brand, I guess, that we're all trying to foster as far as possible. So I really like actually the phrase student ambassador as a job title. I think it really speaks to the importance of what the students are doing as part of Phonathon and the role that they play for the university, remembering that Phonathon is not all about fundraising. It's a hugely important part of Phonathon, but actually increasing the brand and the reputation and affinity towards the university, I think, is arguably an even more important part of the student fundraiser's role. So recruitment, going from A to Z or A to Z in terms of our student fundraisers. Obviously starting with recruitment. It's fantastic if you happen to have a full team of return callers and recruitment is not an issue. You should consider yourself a very lucky Phonathon manager, but nearly every year you're going to have to do some type of a recruitment drive. Even if retention is effectively 100%, you're always going to lose some graduates. So recruitment is where it all begins. And I think it comes down to the cliche here of you get out what you put in. The more you can invest in recruitment, the higher quality team you will be able to build on the back of those recruitment efforts. Now, recruitment materials that you're going to be able to share on your website, maybe share with university career services, put on your landing page, are really, really important. And I think it's all about describing the importance of the role, helping them to understand what they will be achieving and allowing the university to achieve through their efforts. So really driving home how crucial the student fundraiser role is for the university. But also a really nice thing to do, I think, is allow your return callers and previous callers, maybe student supervisors, to speak to that on your behalf. So at my university at King's College, I actually had some of my return callers create a little personal video that we could put on the landing page, where rather than me trying to sell the positives of a particular role, we were actually able to have return callers speak from personal experience about how satisfying and rewarding they had found the job, flexible working, great pay, all the benefits that actually resonate more coming from a peer as opposed to coming from you. So really thinking about creative ways to sell the role in order to encourage as many applicants as possible. And as I say, if you can partner with other entities on campus or off campus, as the case may be, including careers services, student union, all sorts of entities, even thinking about sort of foyers or social areas in which you might be able to post advertisements. So really trying to get the message out, with the goal being that, of course, we want to get as many applicants as possible. And as I say, that little personal video, some previous callers, and even a video of the call centre so that they can envisage what that might look like, is a really nice touch. Now, in terms of shortlisting, we actually had a very structured approach to this. There were certain criteria in terms of a model fundraiser profile that we would vet every single application against. So things like, have they got customer service experience? Have they got any fundraising experience, even if it's a bake sale, but obviously with greater importance being placed to things like door-to-door fundraising or previous telephone fundraising experience. We really enjoyed recruiting public speakers. So the Debating Society, there was a society at our university called Model United Nations, which again is a form of debating effectively. So that was societies that we would particularly target in terms of the students' ability to build a case for support and really generate interest, negotiate. So people with public speaking experience were always kind of ranked fairly highly. Thinking about, as I say, general indicators of success. With that said, I was always a fan of the wild card. So the rule that was put down upon me is we would only hire people that met certain criteria, and we would score them all, and those that would have the highest overall score would be given the chance to interview. And we were usually going from maybe 200 applicants down to about 40 interviewees. So it was quite a significant sift that we did of the applications, but I was always a fan of a few wildcards, people that did not necessarily meet all of the criteria that we had outlined, but for whatever reason, you just got a good feel from the application. Either they'd put a lot of effort there, maybe it was kind of humorous or novel, they'd come up with some sort of innovative approach. And indeed, I'm pleased to say that the wildcard approach usually paid off, and some of our best fundraisers were those wildcard entries. Now, in terms of the interview process, again, I'd urge that you get out what you put in. So actually, once we had our 40 interviewees, I would do a full 5-day week of 40 individual interviews in order to sift those 40 down to usually kind of 25, maybe 28 fundraisers that would be invited to join the team. Now, That was, of course, a huge undertaking. And actually, we would usually have a colleague of mine sit with me on the interviews, partly just for the experience of it, but also just to create that greater sense of sort of importance of what we were doing from the student's perspective. We would invite them to create a case for support. So there was a sort of research onus on the students. They would have to go into the archives of the university website, research areas of fundraising success, and prepare a case for support on anything that was interesting to them, but any of the areas that we were fundraising for at that time. We then had a standard sort of question-based interview face-to-face, but this could of course be done via Zoom in the new normal, where we would ask them the routine interview type questions of talk to me about a time where you had a difficult conversation, talk to me about an instance where you were able to persuade somebody or bring somebody round to your point of view. And once we got through that, and by the way, we'd get some really interesting responses, for better or worse, to a lot of those questions. Once we'd been through the question-based part of the interview, we would then invite the student to go into the room next door and use their cell phone. We did always have a sort of a university cell phone that they could use as well, in order to call myself, and we'd put them on loudspeaker, go through a script, obviously a simplified script. We'd throw a little objection at them and just see how they handled it, just out of curiosity, and then invite them to make their case for support and an ask for funds. And of course, we'd scripted the ask, but they would slot in their little case for support. So it was a fantastic show of effort, which I think is really important. Of course, you know, they've taken the time to do their research, to prepare a case for support, but also their ability to perform under pressure. Actually, that telephone interview is about as close as you can get to replicating or simulating what they'll effectively be doing on their first few shifts and beyond. So really rigorous approach. And as I say, we'd then sift those 40 interviewees down to usually 25, but sometimes if there were a few more that were really strong applicants, we would increase the team size to about 30. But I was always going for quality over quantity. In the job description, we would make clear that we expected them to work X number of shifts, that we expected them to maintain the job for at least 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. And so I was always keen for a quality approach over quantity. I found that generally generated the best success on the phone. So again, people with a bit of persona, a bit of gravitas on the phone was really what we were looking for. People that could make you laugh, that just had a fantastic personality that came across over the phone, clear, audible speaking voice, ability to use their voice as they're making their case for support, ability to bounce back from an objection being given. So as much as it was a huge undertaking to do those 40-minute long interviews, I couldn't recommend that approach enough. So initial training, folks. Now I'll come back to this a little bit later, but I was always in favor of sort of a particular ratio of training, and I would generally aim for maybe 3 parts fundraising to 1 part software, which we will come back to a little bit later. If you can minimize the time spent training them on the software and maximize the time spent training them for the job, i.e. being a fundraiser, I think that is actually what's going to set them up for success, more so than anything else. And if you can even increase that ratio, all the better. So I'd always start off with a little history lesson about the institution, in particular though focusing on fundraising, the importance of advancement, the history of the alumni department, and give them a feel of the picture that they're entering into and the importance of the role that they're taking on. Instilling pride from the get-go, so really trying to educate them about what has been achieved with fundraising to date, you know, telling them how much money was raised on previous campaigns, what that was able to fund, and really from the day one starting to instill a real sense of pride in your students for the job that they're taking on, and the importance of what they're doing on all sorts of different levels. An introduction to the donor journey. So I'll show you a slide that I used to include in my PowerPoints in just a moment, but introducing them to the idea and getting them to understand concepts like participation, and how actually in many ways, if the person gives $100, great, but if they give $10, still fantastic. Participation and what that can mean for the university, not just this year, but next year and the following year, etc. The huge importance of generating a positive experience for the donor. Simple ideas like, they might not give this year, but if you can deliver a fantastically positive experience, they're twice as likely to give next year as they would have been otherwise. And really starting to educate them about the key concepts of alumni advancement and development activity, and even some of the key metrics that you guys would be looking to attain as part of your KPIs and performance indicators. Special guests is a really nice thing to do. I would often try and get our director of development or somebody similar, sometimes actually someone that had benefited from fundraising. So if we had someone that had benefited from a scholarship, for example, someone that had received a hardship bursary or something of that nature, coming in and sharing their story if they were comfortable to do so. And again, really trying to instill the impact of funds raised, but also making sure that from the get-go the students felt that they were an integral and very, very important part of the overall development picture. And that is, as I say, where we'd usually get excuse me, either the principal of the whole university or the director of development to come in and speak to them about the importance of their role. This is just an example of, trying to make the students aware of what they're actually doing, the importance of their role and the tangible impact that they can have on people's lives. They're not just turning up and dedicating 3 or 6 or 9 hours a week to a part-time job. If they're able to perform in this job and do their absolute best, they could be changing people's lives. And I think we'll come back to motivation later. I think arguably this is the greatest source of motivation that you can provide for your students, just connecting them with what they're actually doing and helping the university to achieve on behalf of all sorts of beneficiaries, be that fundraising for the library, be it scholarships and bursaries, hardship funding for emergency cases. Societies, travel grants, etc., research grants. King's, the university I worked at, was one of the world's leading cancer research institutions. So that was hugely powerful, as you can imagine, connecting them, getting them to think about what actually might happen with the funds that they're raising. This is just a way that I would kind of easily introduce them to that idea of the donor journey and how important participation is. You might be disappointed that you only got $10 on the back of your $100 ask, but because they gave that $10 gift, they're actually however many times as likely to give the following year. Just trying to break down that concept of participation and how important it is, even whether the gift may or may not be as high as what the student fundraiser was asking for. So again, trying to treat them as professionals and train them in the way you would a member of your development team, rather than kind of glossing over the importance of some of these issues. So I'm just going to have a look at time. I completely lose track of things once I get going. So fundraising training, folks. As I say, this was the main focus of my training session. I probably do an hour or so on what we've just looked at. So the institutional importance, fundraising in general, what we fundraise for and why. Probably 2 hours on this component, which is actual fundraising training, much like I went through when I became a sort of professional tele-fundraiser for a time, and really trying to give them as many tools as they can in order to succeed. So in terms of easy ways to build rapport, little tips and tricks, as cliche as some of those may seem, ability to build a case for support and what a case for support actually is, making the ask with confidence. I'll come back to some slides in just a moment that I used to use to cover that topic. ability to negotiate and handle objections with confidence and professionalism, and again giving them all the tools that you can in order to help them with that difficult task. Reassure, rebuild, re-ask, we'll come back to in a moment. That was my sort of preferred objection handling technique. Wrapping up the call and even reminding them again that whether somebody gives or decides not to give, we still need to wrap up the call in an equally positive way. Thank that person profusely for their time, even if we're not thanking them for a gift. They've been generous and lent you 10 minutes or 15 minutes of their day, as the case may be. And often I would wrap up this part of the training by having a return caller come and give them their picture, because the last thing we want is the students to go away from this training session feeling totally overwhelmed and daunted by the task that they've taken on once we've been talking about objection handling for 40 minutes. Having a return caller give their experience and, you know, talk about, yes, the first shift is going to be very, very scary, making that first call, going through the script for the first time in its entirety, but you'll get into it. Second shift, third shift, and once you're into second week, you're flying, you're having fun with these calls. So really nice, as per what we said about the recruitment, to allow peers to come in and be part of this training experience, because actually so often it's the case that the things that their peers are saying about these experiences and their experiences will resonate to a greater degree than anything that you could say. So these are again just some of examples of a few of the slides that I would have included in my caller training. So as I mentioned, just because they don't give this time doesn't mean they won't give the next time, and hence delivering a positive experience and leaving a positive, memorable impression as best you can is a hugely important part of the role, possibly above and beyond actually securing the gift itself. Asking for money, so trying not to let your own impression of the amount affect your confidence in making that ask. And I'd usually at this point give a silly example of the difference between, could you help us with a gift of $100 today, versus could you possibly consider making a small contribution of something in the realm of $100, which is obviously a silly and wildly exaggerated example, but often drives home that point about not letting the amount impact upon your ability to ask with confidence, and actually letting them know the average gift from the previous campaign can be really helpful here, because often when you say we're going to be asking people for 50, 100, however many pounds, it seems like a frightening number to be asking for over the phone. But then when you say, actually, the average gift on the last campaign was bang in the middle of those two ask amounts, they suddenly go, well, actually, maybe that's more achievable and attainable than I first thought. Objection handling, I think this is, as we all know, one of the hardest parts about being a fundraiser or indeed a salesperson, which is where I've ended up, are the no's and the rejection that comes with that. And sometimes you feel like you've made the most perfect, fantastic call. Maybe you've kept them on the phone for 20 minutes talking about this, that, and the other and taking them down memory lane. You make your ask, you deliver a perfect case of support, and you still get a no. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. It doesn't get any less heartbreaking with experience. But again, reminding them that that's just part and parcel of the job. Actually, every no that they get gets them closer to a gift. And again, training them on these things as if they were a professional fundraiser joining your team. Don't take these things personally. You're just giving them an opportunity to support, and they have every right to say no. Even if we're making perfect calls every time, we're still going to get an awful lot of no's on the phone. So just instilling a lot of these key concepts from the get-go. This is my preferred objection handling approach. So reassuring them, rebuilding your case for support. So I've heard you, I understand your objection. This is why, despite your objection, I think you should still consider supporting, even if that's at a smaller level or possibly a different project area, which might be more interesting to you. And finally, making another ask with confidence, having reassured and rebuilt. golden rules, and again, we're just running through example slides here, but remembering above all, relax and enjoy it. You know, really, if you can have fun on the phone and genuinely enjoy your job, you're going to instill that same level of passion and enthusiasm, hopefully, in the person that you're speaking to, and that is your primary role. Actually, the fundraising is just part of the job that you're doing, and above everything else, just have fun with it and bring your own personality to the phone calls that you're making, which is effectively why you were hired, because of your fantastic personality. So, moving on, folks, from the fundraising training side of things, we're next going to talk about software. Now, I don't want to linger on this for too long, but simple software is hugely advantageous for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's going to help you attain that model training ratio of maybe 3 parts fundraising, 1 part software. When I was first trained as a student fundraiser, I won't say how long ago that was, but some time ago, I sat through, I think, 2 or 3 hours of fundraising training, which was fantastic. And then a full weekend of software training. It was 2 8-hour days consecutively on a Saturday and a Sunday, of going through page after page of documents about software, how to, and this is how you handle that, and what have you. I came away feeling like I'd absorbed absolutely nothing, and I felt totally overwhelmed about the task at hand, only because it sort of built up this software task to be this almost impossible asking of me before I'd even sat down at the computer. So actually, if you can get a piece of software that is fairly quick and easy to train your students on, it's going to alleviate a lot of the nervousness about that part of their role, and allow you to focus a lot more time on the stuff that's actually going to help them succeed in fundraising, which is everything that we've talked about so far. By way of example, when I was training my students on VanillaSoft once upon a time, it was half an hour walkthrough of the software. I'd then give them half an hour to click through some dummy data, have a play with the script, try updating some information, as the case may be, ask any questions. Everybody's on the phone within an hour. So it was really kind of the introduction to their first shift. The fundraising training would usually happen the evening before. And then on their first shift, half an hour walkthrough, half an hour clicking around and playing, straight onto the phone. No opportunity to build up any unnecessary anxiety, straight on the phone within the hour. Additionally, ideally, a good piece of calling software is going to make the student's job as easy as possible. If the software itself is adding any additional complexity to the job, any additional burden onto the student to remember to do X or make sure to do Y, effectively all we're doing is distracting them from their primary role, which is having an interesting and engaging conversation and actually listening to the alumnus, which is of course hugely important, but very, very difficult to do while you're multitasking. So we really want the software to be as intuitive as possible so they can dedicate their full attention, or 98% of their attention, to the conversation itself, rather than kind of drifting off and minimizing this and back and forward and maximizing that again. And I think when you are distracted on the phone, you can hear it. If I was responding to an email at this point whilst trying to deliver this presentation, you guys would know by the tone of my voice, even if you couldn't see it on my face. Reducing margin for error. So we don't want to spoon feed. I'm not sure why I included that word. It sounds very kind of babyish again, but anything that's going to kind of reduce the margin for error. So little prompts that would come up automatically at certain points of the call, gather the email address or whatever it may be. When we get to the end of the call, if you've secured a pledge, please now input, and you'd have mandatory prompts, perhaps, the relevant pledge information, etc. So anything that's going to alleviate the need for the student to be going through a mental checklist, and effectively have the piece of software automate the process of going through that checklist. Scripting, dynamic, kind of modern scripting, if you will, that will actually steward the student through the conversation in a way that sounds and feels much less scripted, is going to be a really quick win for you. I remember, again, when I was a student fundraiser at one time, we were using paper scripts. And if I was given an objection, I had, I think, maybe 15 or 20 different objection responses. But rather than kind of immediately being able to click and be fed the perfect objection response, there was this 3 or 4 second pause, which felt like a 3 or 4 hour pause to me as I was looking for the next objection response that I needed to give. So a sort of dynamic approach to scripting where they'll be fed the next thing they need to say at any point in the call is going to make it sound much less scripted and remove some of the anxiety around finding the next thing that they need to say, depending on the response that they've been given. Call listening is really important. We'll come back to that a little bit later in terms of coaching and ongoing development, but the ability to listen into your students and listen to the calls that they're making live, hear both sides of the conversation as it's happening, is going to give you the best possible opportunity to actually give live support, even as they're making the call potentially. So something called call whispering or instant messaging that would allow you to actually coach them live on the call. Or failing that, of course, even if you're just listening, taking notes and then immediately delivering that feedback to them at the end of the call. Student-led improvements is the last thing. I would routinely, I tried to do it weekly. In practice, it often ended up being monthly, but a student workshop around what could we be doing better from the software perspective. Is anything clunky? Is anything holding you back? Is anything proving to be a distraction that's not worth distracting you for? Are there any questions in the script that just aren't working? Anywhere where maybe you're saying, could I interested you in, a brief summary of what we're doing to fundraise for X, and you get a grunt or a silence. Is there a way that we could actually rephrase that question so as to deliver a more positive response, for example? So again, sort of instilling a greater degree of professionalism. Again, this isn't a top-down situation. You guys are on the front line, your feedback is invaluable, and actually any suggestions that you might make as to how we could be doing this better, I want to take on board and action as far as possible. So that's the topic of software, folks, and moving swiftly on. Trust and professionalism. This is a topic that I could easily spend an hour and 15 minutes talking about, so I'm going to rein myself in here. But I think, and I think this is more so actually in the UK than in the US that I've seen this, but this desire to screen and spot check and approve absolutely every action that the student is taking. And actually, my much preferred approach is to instill the level of professionalism in your students that you would like to expect from them and hold them to. Educating them again about the importance of the job that they're doing, the importance of any possible errors that they would make and the impact that that would have. So be that, for example, recording an incorrect pledge amount, be that typos in a custom email that maybe they've been allowed to send out. If you're leveraging video functionality, the importance of making sure that they're in a quiet workspace and they don't have housemates walking along behind them, rather than just sort of locking all of this stuff down, just educating them about the importance of applying proper care and due diligence and attention to detail in everything that they are doing as ambassadors of the university brand. And again, coming back to that concept of these guys being at the front line of the university brand, but putting that trust and that confidence in them, and using that almost as a way to motivate them to do their job better. Setting the tone from day one, I think, is really important, and that's in the context of being an ambassador for the brand, but also, I really wanted to have a very, very relaxed feel in the call centre. I wanted to befriend the students as far as possible, kind of be down with the kids, be seen as one of them if I could. And let everyone have a laugh. I didn't want it to be this very intense, serious operation. I was open to them having a little bit of a giggle between calls, or everybody hang around in the call center for 10-15 minutes after the shift finished and just catch up and what have you. But it's a tricky line, of course, between having that very relaxed feel to what you're doing and actually people starting to take advantage a little bit, which is why it's very, very important to lay out your basic expectations from the get-go and then actually clamp down on them in a fairly public way if people are not meeting those expectations. Now, that can be all sorts of different things. The two examples that I've highlighted are lateness. So tardiness, turning up late to shift on a regular basis. Things happen. If someone is late on a one-off basis, fine, things happen. If someone is persistently late, that is a huge issue. You're costing us, I'm paying you for your time. Every minute that you're not in the call center, you're not calling, which is impacting upon our campaign results and possibly limiting the number of gifts and conversations that we can have. And for that reason, that was a very important topic for me. And as such, if anybody was more than 15 minutes late, their pay would be docked. And if they were late on a repeat basis, they would be asked to kindly let go of their role in the call center. So that was one thing I was very, very strict about. And again, importance of laying down those ground rules from the get-go. Also bad attitude. And actually, I am thinking of a particular caller as I talk to you about this. But if we want to have a nice, positive, fun, relaxed, cheerful time in the call center, we need everyone to be coming with a positive attitude. And, this particular caller was so negative for any feedback that I would give if she was late. And I, sort of told her off for that. She would be scowling at me, the silent treatment for the whole shift. So eventually I had to let her go. And again, explain to the team why that was, that we try to create a certain energy in the call center. And actually that sort of bad attitude is just not what we're aiming for. So all about the fun, the relaxed environment, above and beyond almost anything else, but not being afraid as needed to just clamp down and demand a certain level of professionalism from the team. Caller surveys was the last thing, and this is similar to what I was saying about software. On a monthly basis, I would do an anonymous survey for the team. There would be series questions, what are you finding motivating? What are you finding demotivating? Is there anything that I could be doing better as your boss or team lead? And then also just kind of an open section at the end. Have you got any extra comments? Let me know. It was all done anonymously. And again, just a really nice way to make sure that they felt heard and that they felt like they had the opportunity to participate in the team, which I think was quite rewarding for them. And again, I would, at the beginning of the following week, discuss the key themes that came up, explain what I was planning to do to address them, or different things that we might be trying going forward as a result of them, and really giving that ownership over the role, given the importance of what they're doing. Remote fundraising amplifies everything that we have talked about so far to the nth degree. Particularly the burden of trust and responsibility that we're placing on the students. It's one thing when we have them all in the call center and we can monitor absolutely everything that they're doing. Totally different ball game when we have them at home in their bedrooms or dormitories, as the case may be. Naturally, the ability to oversee what they're doing is significantly reduced, even with the kind of best available technology solutions that we might come up with. And so I think the importance again of making sure that they fully understand that the burden of trust and their role as an ambassador for the institution, accepting that you won't be able to listen to every call that they make and kind of monitor every move that they make. Gift processing is a really interesting topic. From a PCI perspective, I think you're probably all aware, actually, whether the student is on the call centre seat or indeed in their bedroom at home makes no difference whatsoever from a PCI perspective. But from our perspective, you could see why there's a significant trust burden that needs to be overcome there. There are a lot of alternative solutions, of course, simply sending out pledge emails. A lot of our customers are leveraging call transfer, so the student gets the person to effectively pledge and commit to making a gift on the phone, and then transfers the alum or potential donor over to a supervisor who processes the gift. But personally, I don't think there would be any significant issue with letting students process gifts at home, and we have a number of customers at the moment that are doing that. Again, it's a trust thing, and I tend to think that we are more often than not rewarded by putting trust in the students. And I had an interesting conversation with somebody who used to work for RNL not so long ago, and we were having this conversation about remote gift processing, and he said that in 20 years of calling experience, the only instance he ever had of somebody writing down card information was in a call center. And this individual has actually now been running remote calling operations for 2 years, so had a huge wealth of experience to lend on that topic. But interesting food for thought. I think in reality, if your students are going to get up to no good, they can actually do that just as well in the call center as they would at home. Although, of course, the temptation may be ever so slightly greater at home. The kind of the combination of accountability and support in the remote context. So we need to be able to be accountable for our students via call listening, that type of thing, so that we can monitor the quality of the conversations that they're having. But what I think we also forget is the importance of being able to support them should they get into any difficulty. And actually, I think it's similar functionality. So call listening, call transfer, the ability to make a two-way call, a three-way call, and bring the supervisor in is really important so that you can provide that same level of support for the students in a remote capacity as you would kind of in a call center, where if they did get into a difficult conversation, if they have an alum that's in distress, as the case may be, they're actually able to sort of handle that, and they're not feeling totally isolated and alone and dealing with that difficult situation. They can bring you into the call, transfer the call to you, as the case may be. Training in a remote environment, lots of innovative solutions coming up for this at the moment. I think actually most of the training that I have described could be done perfectly well via Zoom. Trickier bit would be the kind of letting them have an explore of the software prior to the first shift, and indeed those first few shifts when they're more likely to need support. A lot of our customers have been doing a kind of a Zoom call center approach where all of the students are on a Zoom meeting whilst they're making their calls. They're on mute, of course, so that the phonathon manager doesn't have an overwhelming blur of noise going on through their headset, but at any point the student can unmute themselves and then speak directly to the supervisor. So again, and even be able to see their peers as they're doing that gives a greater sense of team effort. So I think Zoom is proving fairly invaluable as it is in so many areas. I've just seen there is something in the chat box. I am keeping an eye. No, so interestingly, it's not. The question is it against PCI compliance to have students process gifts from home? The answer is no. From a PCI perspective, it doesn't actually make any difference whether the student is on site or off site. It really just comes down to a trust and comfortability issue, I think, on the part of not only the phonathon manager, but senior management up above the phonathon manager, wherein more often than not, people are saying they just don't feel comfortable with the idea of the student taking card information at home, which is totally understandable. But actually, from a PCI perspective, it makes no odds whatsoever. So it's a really, again, a topic that you could spend an hour talking about easily, but we will move on. Oh, apologies. Okay, I've skipped a slide here. Work with me. Here we go. Coaching and development. So, really important point here, training does not stop once your students hit the phone. Really important to keep that development and training and coaching effort going continuously, in the same way, you know, our managers are continuously training and developing and reviewing our performance. Same exact application in the call center, where on a regular basis you should be providing team level training and support and development, but also individual training, support and development as often as possible. I really like to do a kick-off meeting before every shift. So I think the students would arrive at 5:45 usually, and we would then spend 15 minutes kind of addressing any tricky issues that came up the week before, bring them up to date with campaign stats and performance, making them aware of any university news or fundraising successes that they might want to talk about on the phone, and also a little bit of open forum. Any thoughts, any comments, any questions before we get going? And again, just making sure that people had the opportunity to voice any thoughts, questions, concerns on a regular basis. Call listening, coaching, workshopping. So if we had a particularly meaty issue that was coming up, or a topic perhaps that was raised that wasn't necessarily black or white. So I can remember having a workshop around opt-outs, and, you know, talking to the students about, yes, it's very important to opt somebody out if they specifically ask to be opted out, but actually on the flip side, it's very important that we only opt people out when they specifically ask to be opted out, otherwise we'll have no data left. Going through then and kind of workshopping different call scenarios. If somebody says X, how would we handle it? What do you think? What do you guys think? Any comments? Would anybody do differently, etc.? And kind of doing that workshop approach to training. Particularly for persistent issues that were coming up regularly, or issues that were provoking a bit of a debate in terms of how we should handle them. Issue of vulnerable people, or people, sorry, my goodness, a firework just went off outside my window and gave me a fright. Suddenly got very bright in here. Yeah, issue of vulnerable people, for example. So it's an important topic of, you know, sometimes we have to exercise good conscience on our calls and actually decide not to make an ask to a particular individual, but in what circumstances, and kind of workshopping those tricky issues. Group approach to overcoming issues as they arise, encouraging discussion and teamwork, absolutely, but also the dedicated one-to-one training time. So I committed that every week I would listen to a full call live for every single one of my fundraisers. So they would effectively raise their hand once they were getting into a call, and, you know, they were pretty confident they'd get the full way through the script. I would then jump onto the call immediately and listen to the full conversation, take notes as I go, and then obviously at the end of the call deliver feedback, training points, things that they might like to work on their next few calls, and then points to review the following week. So I kind of had an ongoing log of particular issues affecting particular people, and how we might work to overcome those. And actually a peer-to-peer approach to that is really nice as well. So every now and again, pairing up various fundraisers to do exactly what I've just described, obviously being sensitive to the need to keep it predominantly positive. So I would ask them to pair up, and on the course of that shift, each listen to one full call on behalf of the other person, 3 things they did well, 1 thing they could improve on. So again, nice to instill that level of sort of team ethic, and responsibility and professionalism again, in the call center. Motivation, folks. So this is also a very interesting topic that could easily cover an hour, but I am running close to time here, so we're going to whiz through this. Firstly, I absolutely believe that student fundraisers should be paid. I had actually never come across voluntary student fundraisers until I started working with universities in the US. Obviously, if you have some sort of policy that precludes you from paying your students, your hands are tied. But It's an important job, it's a hard job, and if you want to recruit the best team for the job, I think you have to be offering a competitive salary. If you want to retain the team, again, you have to make sure that you are paying them at a competitive rate. Otherwise, as soon as the next best thing comes up, they're going to jump ship and go somewhere else where they can earn more money 9 times out of 10. Bonuses, now this is even more contentious. When I was a student fundraiser back in my day, I actually received bonuses. So I had weekly targets, and if I could hit my targets, I would get a bonus at the end of the week. I was, at that time in particular, very money motivated. So I worked my absolute socks off. I took up every single spare shift that was going so that I would have my best chance of hitting the weekly target and getting my bonus. I've actually never heard of any other university that does that, so I consider myself very lucky, but something to consider, or indeed some other alternative. Treats, chocolate would be the go-to. I had what I called the glory drawer, the drawer of glory, that anytime somebody got a gift, they could come to the desk and open up the glory drawer and pull out any chocolate or sweet treats that they wanted to reward themselves with on that occasion. Eventually had to get vegan treats and such like to cater for everybody. So each to their own, whatever a treat means to you and your team. Institutional perks are a great idea, and this also helps with recruitment. So I was able to secure free gym membership for our student calling team, because I think at one time we did a project that served the gym or raised money for the gym, and so we did a bit of kind of give and take there. Access to events, so if you have guest lecturers coming in or social events, whatever it might be, trying to get your team free tickets for that type of thing, anything that would kind of save the student a bit of money and give them a perk to the job. Work experience building, CV, anything that would sort of develop them as a professional. I would actually, if people had an interest in a particular activity going forward in their career, I would see if I could leverage anything in the development team or development department. So, you know, if they wanted to go into marketing, if they were interested in medical, we had a big hospital arm of our fundraising operation. We had a dental team that raised money for the dentistry school specifically. So all sorts of angles and ways that we could potentially get the students some free work experience that would help them to build up their CV. Promotion opportunities. So the ability, if you have been on the team for a full year and you've demonstrated your ability to lead the team and follow good practice consistently, you can become a supervisor. With that comes more benefits for your CV and future job applications, but also a better salary. You can earn more on an hourly rate. So really trying to leverage everything that may be motivating, but above and beyond everything else, making them feel proud to do what they're doing by way of educating them about what we're fundraising for, getting special guests, be it beneficiaries or senior members of the kind of university team, and indeed just saying thank you a lot. I thanked the students every night before they went home for the amazing job that they were doing, and sometimes I'm quite an emotional person. It would have been a very tough shift or a very fantastic shift, and I would genuinely get a bit emotional and convey my deep and heartfelt thanks for them and the hard work and the amazing job that they're doing. So thank you, as in all walks of life, goes a really long way. Retention, all sorts of things that we can do to help retention, kind of everything we've talked about so far, but beyond that, flexible working, I think is really important. We had a Facebook group that would allow the students to swap shifts if somebody was really busy with coursework or whatever it might be that week, preparing for exams. Somebody else who had different priorities or different workload that week could snap up that shift. And indeed, I had some students that literally wanted to work every single shift that was available, which was fantastic for them and encouraged them to keep the job because of the kind of much higher earning potential, but also allowed me to retain some other students through exam season that might have had to give up their job otherwise. Ideally, you're going to help your best fundraisers take on as much work as they possibly can. So if you can orchestrate that in any way, I certainly had some members of my team that I would have given every shift under the sun, and others, of course, that perhaps you'd prefer to stick to their 3 a week, but trying to facilitate that as best you can. And everything else I think we have already talked about. And I am rattling through, guys. I think we've got 1 or 2 slides still to go, and then hopefully 10 minutes for questions. Team building is, of course, particularly hard at the moment, but some innovative approaches, no doubt, will be born out of this online team environment that we're all working with. I, as I say, really wanted close working relationships with the students, really relaxed, friendly, fun environment. We had the Facebook group, which was not only for shift swapping, but general kind of sharing of anecdotes and funny stories or motivational bits and pieces. As the case may be, we had an Instagram page where people were really creative about coming up with phonathon related memes and other quite hilarious content that helped to build a bit of team morale. But obviously making sure that we monitor those quite closely and keep everything appropriate and above board. Events and socials. So be those kind of specific to the phonathon team. Let's all go out for dinner. Let's, book one of the rooms and all bring pizza or order pizzas, whatever it may be. If the university was putting on certain events, get the team down, let's all go, see if you can get them free tickets. So lots of interesting options there. Pizza, cheese. My boss allowed us to have a wine and cheese night once a semester, which was a great hit. And we'd do a shift on a Friday, and then everybody could stay after for an hour or two, and I would bring heaps of cheese and a few bottles of wine, and we'd all kind of socialize together. Themed nights, at Halloween, I'd have everybody come in Halloween outfits to the call center. Masks were allowed, whatever they wanted, to try and introduce some fun into what we were doing. As Christmas approached, I decorated the whole call center. We'd have Christmas music playing. Again, Santa hats encouraged, elf slippers, as the case may be. So any way to just keep everything as light and fun as possible, remembering what a tough job it can be at times. Key takeaways, folks: treat your team as professionals, I think, is my most important takeaway. No babying of the fundraisers. Treat them as you would expect to be treated by your boss, and instill the importance of the job that they're doing in them as best you can. Have fun, always an important takeaway. Setting expectations from day one, remembering that there is that fine line to be walked between a really fun, relaxed, amicable environment, but also making sure that your expectations are met, particularly as regards turning up on time and having a good attitude when you turn up. Constant shows of gratitude, making your students feel super proud to do the job that they're doing, and reminding them of that as often as you possibly can. Setting them up for success outside the call centre, so professional development in whatever form that might take. And finally, the right fundraisers with the right training and support is really your one-way ticket to maximise fundraising success, in my opinion at least. So folks, that is the end. I hope the pace wasn't too frantic as I was keeping an eye on time there. We have actually got 10 minutes for questions, which is a miracle. I was having to rein myself in throughout there and not get carried away on a few different topics. But hope that was interesting and useful for everybody listening. I'd love to know if anybody has any questions, thoughts, feedback, any contentious topics raised that people might want to weigh in on. There's not too many of us here, so I guess if anybody wants to bravely unmute themselves, feel free. Otherwise, the chat box is at your disposal. Otherwise, you guys are released early from school and you can go and get yourself a coffee or whatever you need before your next session. But I'll just pause there in case anybody is frantically typing in the chat box. Alrighty, folks, people seem to be checking out. So I think I'll just thank you all for your time. As I say, I really hope that that was useful. Maybe you came away with some interesting ideas, thoughts, be that for the virtual call centre that you're running or as and when the students are back in call centre seats. Thank you all so much for listening, and good luck with everybody. Keep sane, keep sane, and I'll speak to you hopefully this time next year, if not before. All right, Jess. Think time to check out.
Yeah, that was great, Rachel. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.